Welcome back to Sechelt's Hidden Grove. Today we'll take a little nature's walk through Monty's Way. If you like, you can pause here to get oriented. We're going to be heading pretty much northwest. There are many different types of trees in this forest, but it is a second growth forest. It was logged quite extensively back in the 1940s, 50s or so. And this big tree right in front of us is a Douglas fir. See, they grow quite tall. They can go up to 90 meters tall, and they can live for over 1,000 years, 1,200 years. The bark is quite thick, which can insulate them during fires. First Nations use the wood for spoons to harpoon shafts. And the reason I know all this is because it's written down right here. So as we go on our little nature walk today for Toby, Cillian and Sam, we'll stop and take a look at some of the things of interest. You can see there's a lot of trees that have fallen naturally. Wind can do that. Age. When we looked at the Douglas fir, you can see in the bark of this tree there's a distinct red tinge to it. This is the western red cedar. It's probably the most common tree here in the Hidden Grove, and historically one of the most important to the native First Nations people. Totem poles, log houses, and canoes were made of red cedar. The bark was stripped and woven into hats and rain gear. It was also considered to have healing and spiritual powers. It's resistant to decay, and the attractive grain makes it a valuable building material in modern times. This little bush here is called a Salal. It's one of the most abundant shrubs in coastal forests. It can often form impenetrable thickets. The berries were eaten fresh or used as sweeteners or formed into dried cakes. You can see in the picture here the blue berries. That's Salal. Unfortunately, it's a bit too early for this one, or the bears have already gotten all theirs. Nice little example of a shelf fungus here, growing on a fallen log that's covered with moss. You look up ahead here, you can see that bark's missing on some of these trees, at least a strip of bark. I have two over here on the right that have been stripped as well. Bark stripping. Up until 2010, the First Nations people harvested bark here for traditional uses. Trees about the diameter of a telephone pole are the best choice. And there's only about a 6-week window when the sap is running for optimal stripping. They do this by placing a horizontal cut about 1 foot, 30 centimeters wide, about 5 feet off the ground. Then small vertical cuts are made at each end, and the bark is pried away from the tree using a knife. This tail is then pulled so that the bark peels from the tree in a gradually narrowing strip, sometimes as long as 60 feet. After separating the outer bark from the softer core, it's then cut into 1-inch wide strips and soaked for a year. The strips are then ready for making traditional items: baskets, hat, and rainwear. And if you like, you can pause and read this. It's really noticeable once you set your mind to looking is how many trees have fallen down. There have been quite a few windstorms over the years that tends to knock these trees down. This one particular tree here, huge tree that's been knocked down, it's what's called a nurse log. When a large tree falls in the forest and slowly decays, it provides decades of water and nutrients to young seedlings. This lets them get above the forest floor where there's more light and less competition for the young trees. And the roots are protected by the moss layer and fed by the accumulation of litter. You can see in this particular nurse log, there's one young tree growing here, but there's a couple of older trees that are very well established, like this one and its neighbor right there. So they've been growing there for quite a while. So everything in the forest is recycled. Out of death comes new life. When these trees were being cut down in the 40s and 50s, sometimes the trees were so big the loggers couldn't get to the little bit narrow part. So they used to cut little footholds into them. You can see at the base of this stump here, there's a little notch there. And a wooden plank would be inserted in the notch, and the loggers would stand on that. And that would allow them to get access to the bit of the thinner part of the log. It would be a little bit easier to cut them down. So you'll notice in some of these old stumps, these little slots or notches here. There's a big nurse log fallen here. So Toby, Cillian and Sam, when your parents get after you to clean up your room, well, just look around at a forest. Everything's so messy. But that's okay. You can just tell them your room is like the forest. There's just a natural disorder to it. Over here we have a different type of tree. This is a big leaf maple tree. You can see how it didn't grow straight in its younger years, and then it curves up. And these can grow up to 35 meters tall. It carries a bigger load of moss than any other native tree in this area. Some people have recently tried to produce maple sap from these trees, but they're about 30% less sweet than the eastern maple sap trees. Throughout the forest you'll see lots of these different ferns. These ones have fairly narrow fronds. This is the deer fern. It looks like a small sword fern. We'll see one of those a little bit later. Prefers moist soil. Here's some other people walking through Monty's way. No. So here's a western hemlock. The sign says it's often found on nurse logs, but this one is just growing out of the ground. It can grow up to 60 meters tall. Commercially, hemlock is used in construction, but it's a poor cousin to the Douglas fir due to its lesser strength, so it's mostly used for pulp in the pulp and paper industry. This is a grape tree, or a grape plant, but it doesn't really actually have any grapes on it right now. The holly-like leaves with yellow blossoms and tart purple berries. The bark is also yellow on the inside. Right now, those berries don't look good enough to eat. I'm not sure I'd want to eat them anyway. I think I'll stick to the Salal berries. Now this tree is a red alder. You can kind of see it's a bit of a reddish tinge. It's a relatively short-lived tree, but it grows very fast. It's one of the first trees to colonize an area after a forest fire. It helps to fix the nitrogen in the soil, which benefits the big conifers and fir trees that follow on afterwards. The bark was used by the First Nations as a dye, a red-orange dye, and the grain of the wood was so nice they used it for masks and bowl. It's still considered to be one of the best woods for smoking salmon. So when you buy smoked salmon, you'll often get it smoked over red alder. Another tree that broke in the wind. And you can see we're coming up to the end of Monty's Way. But we're going to look at a sword fern. We saw the deer fern earlier. You can see the sword fern is quite a bit bigger. It's the largest and most common evergreen fern in southwest British Columbia. And the First Nations people use this as bedding. They can stuff pillowcases and mattresses with it. I wonder what it's like to sleep on a pillow stuffed with sword fern. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed our little nature walk through Monty's Way. And we're back to where we started.